Before we begin, thank you very much to Nick A for rejoining the Patreon campaign over at patreon.com/TJOmega. All of the help genuinely is appreciated and keeps the channel going, keeps the videos coming. Literally, it's keeping me doing this. So if you enjoy it, thank you very much, and pitch in if you can. If you can't, hitting like and subscribe also helps a lot for free. So thank you, everyone. It is the 20th anniversary of Transformers Armada, and I know, this is me we're talking about. I like to rag on Transformers Armada a lot, but that's all in good fun. That's all me. That's like exaggeration for comedic sake. For looking back on Transformers Armada, there was a lot. It was a very different time for Transformers fans. So I figured today, let's give Armada its due because it's its birthday, and we'll just kind of talk a little bit about what it was like back then, because you have to remember where Transformers was at the time. So we had just gotten through with Beast Wars, which was, of course, everyone who gave the cartoon a chance loved the cartoon, and the hardcore true fans just ragged on the entire thing and basically just trashed the entirety of it because truck not monkey. That old debate. Then we move into Beast Machines. And this is where we all started to kind of agree on things for once. Us Beast Wars fans hated all the character changes. Apparently, even the actors hated the character changes that they had to read through. And the hardcore fans still weren't getting what they wanted. Vehicles came back, but most Viacon toys were not all that great. So you have this mix of vehicle and beast, but it's not making either fan happy. We move into RID. And we know as fans, at this point, the internet's a thing. We've been able to gather and talk. News sites have become a thing. But at this point, we kind of knew that RID was just kind of a quickly thrown together line. We knew it was an anime coming in from Japan. We knew it was, we had the anime on Fox Kids, and it wasn't the best quality dub. Like, it was pretty rough. But what good toys we had. We got great toys with RID, and we got some repaints of some of the better ones in previous lines, but it still wasn't right. It was the return of Autobots, but it still had that Beast Wars kind of feel to it, especially if you imported Japanese Beast Wars that relied a lot more on shell parts. So the aesthetic wasn't quite there yet. We were getting back to some familiar traits, but nothing that was really pleasing everyone. And we were in this period of, we knew what we were getting was a thrown together, basically like a placeholder until something else could be done. Until, like, we're all just kind of like, we were enjoying RID for what it was, but we're all kind of just waiting to see what happened next, because we knew this was only going to go for a year. When Armada was finally announced and we started to see what the toys looked like, the direction it was going in, the concepts for it, there was an excitement in the Transformers fandom like we had never had before. Not like this was like a proper return. Okay, of course. Okay, fine. So only like Optimus Prime and Starscream kind of resembled their original designs, but they looked really, really good. They looked really different, but it was still them. It was familiar but new, which is the best way to describe it. We had Autobots and Decepticons as the primary factions once again. No Maximals, no Predacons, no Viacons, just Autobot and Decepticon. There was excitement over things like how solid the figures looked. You imagine going from RID, like, let's say, Sideburn, and just like how many shells and things are hanging off him and how thin the actual robot mode looks, versus like Demolishor, who's just this big chunk of toy. It's such a drastic change, and it felt like they were getting back to how solid the original toys were. Using the parts of the vehicle to make the parts of the robot rather than hiding a robot inside the vehicle. big difference in aesthetic and design ideal. That was exciting. Uh, even things like even things like the sculpted in faction symbols were actually kind of an exciting thing. They weren't stickers anymore. They weren't little tampagraphs that were easily going to rub off. No, this was hard, firm, molded into the toy design. Even that was actually kind of cool. We kind of gave them hell because they were like they didn't paint they didn't paint just the surface of the emblems on the toys. They painted like the entirety, including the lines in between. So like you could see the Autobot symbol, but it was just like this red blob. They fixed that eventually. Eventually they figured out, oh, we shouldn't have done that. I think even at Hasbro, like I think someone at a BotCon or something asked them why they did that, and they say like, we were shocked everyone cared that much about it. So I think in a weird way it also gave like Hasbro a kick in the pants to let them know, hey, we kind of don't want you to skimp out on things. But even that was cool. Like even that was a cool thing. And then you got to like the whole point of it, which was the mini-con. The idea that the gimmicks were unlocked by a tiny transformer was actually a really novel idea. And just the idea that you got like basically you got a mini transformer for free. What we back then were basically saying like a free Micromaster with every transformer. That was actually really cool, and people got excited over things like the Minicon 3 packs, where you could just mass collect all these tiny transformers and they all interacted with the large transformers. Play wise, it was a really, really cool scheme. You know, it wasn't just like the ones that could activate the specific gimmicks. You had ones that did that, but the idea that you could use any on most of them, I think on Blur only Incinerator actually activates his gimmick, but the rest of them were like you just pile them on and pretend they did stuff, or put them on where you thought they looked cool. If you had matching minicons and different, or like if you bought multiples of minicons and you could just start making like symmetrical armor out of them or symmetrical weapons. Like I think the best minicons back in the day were like triple changer ones that gave you like weapon options as well. Like that was super cool. So now we worked a Target Master style gimmick into these minicons. They just kept getting better. And then like the idea that they all had something to do. You had some that integrated with Cyclonus. You had some that combined into larger weapons that the others could hold. There were very few minicon sets, like the race team, for instance. Um, there were very few that just were just little transformers. But even then, you look at ones like Oval from the you look at like Oval is like a very standard looking minicon. He very looks like a very standard Autobot, chest, hood, arm, like very standard. But there's something to be said for a toy that took the engineering from the 80s and brought it down into such a tiny format without losing anything. In fact, it's more articulated than they were back then. It was a really cool way of seeing just how far Transformers had come. That what we used to get as like a main figure in the 80s could now be produced in like a super tiny size. That was a cool part about it. But in general, like the minicons were just cool. They were fun to collect. It was fun to see hordes of them lining your shelf. I had them all lined up at the feet of the front row of my bookshelves, and like it was cool to know how much that they were actually capable of. The toys themselves, like when we got our hands on them, like the first thing that you felt when you got your hands on a Armada toy was just how heavy they were and how solid they were compared to the shell-centric toys that we got in RID. And even the repainted toys from previous lines, Beast Machines had more of a light aesthetic to it as well. So to get these in hand that were just like super chunky and heavy and gimmick loaded, like I I rag on gimmicks because I prefer a very well fleshed out action figure. I prefer accuracy and posability. Uh, I prefer proportions that are more heroic. That's personal taste. But when you have gimmicks crammed into toys, that does limit what they can do. You look at the gimmicks that are thrown into Armada Red Alert, for instance. You know, he's got a big disc launcher in his chest, which means his chest has to be huge and sticks out a lot farther than a designer would typically like. You have the light, you know, like the sound effect box and like a flip out arm weapon, like the flip out cannon, in that basically requires him to have a huge heavy backpack as well. Things like that. Things like that. That irks me looking back at it. But you do remember, we just got done with a toy line where in order to get big gimmicks, you had to buy the biggest figure. So like your deluxes were just complex transformers. You know, you had a couple combiners in there, but that's about it. Um, when you look at the difference, it was exciting to see all of these different transformers that could all do these different tricks. Even ones like Scavenger, which I think even back then people knew, okay, this one's not all that great. But just getting remember, the last time we saw walking gimmick transformers was Omega Supreme and Tripticon. Those big stompers walking across the field. Uh, so it had to be that big in order to get a gimmick like that. Now it's down here in the $20 toy. This is $20 back when that was like a large size figure, not like $20 today, which is like like Cliff Jumper. Inflation sucks, doesn't it? So it was cool. It was cool again to see the kind of things you'd have to spend, you know, a lot of money for to get in a tiny affordable package. And just the fact that everyone did something different. Everyone had their own trick. Everyone had their own little thing that made them special and stand out. There's a lot to enjoy. It was an exciting time. You know, when you took like Leader Optimus Prime and you transformed him for the first time, and you're just watching that trailer like flip over and unfold into the base mode, and then you go into the super mode and you watch the thing rise up on its own. You know, that was so cool to see back in the day when that kind of stuff was like, you had no idea how they managed to make that work. You know it's all servos and gears, etc. But you like thinking back to it, like when you first saw that happen, that's like toy magic. That it actually does that and it all works. Super cool stuff like that. And you go and find out later on, like you draw the line out and you start getting, you know, other things. You start getting like the repaint homages. So now like Hot Rod, you know, Hot Shot looks like Hot Rod and Starscream looks like Thundercracker. So we're getting some legacy characters coming back in. You start getting in things like what was it? You see like the advanced combination gimmicks with Optimus Prime. You know, a Jetfire that becomes the legs, a Overload that becomes his weapon, like a big weapon rack. So now you have this super powered like combination. And to this day, I wish there was like one release that was like all three in a unified color scheme. I don't think they ever did that. I don't think they ever quite got to that point, but man, that would have been cool. But just the idea that like you don't get that anymore, like ever. You don't get super modes. You don't get characters who are designed to just be like weapon packs for Optimus Prime or Megatron. You don't get to see like cool integration between larger figures anymore. It's always relegated to like smaller accessory figures or things like weaponizers, which is basically just it comes apart and you figure out what to do with it, which is fun. You can do things, but it's not. But it's something. It's a completely different beast when it's integrated, when it's like meant to be. Even Megatron got that. Like Megatron never gets super modes, but he got one here with Tidal Wave, and again, it's not the greatest, but it was something. And Tidal Wave himself was just such a cool figure. Like that was again three individual vehicles, one super vehicle, one gigantic robot. Even the minicon integration I loved because like Tidal Wave was big enough to store his minicon inside of him. That kind of stuff was really, really cool back then. I loved that kind of stuff. So Armada had a lot going for it. When you look back at the time we were in, what we were used to getting, and what we were hoping for, Armada hit a lot of the right buttons at the right time. It was Hasbro and Takara teaming together and actually reading the tea leaves correctly. I will admit, the animation dropped the ball. You can't blame that on the toy line itself or as a whole. Like you blame that on translators who weren't paying attention to character names. You point that at directors who just viewed it as a toy commercial and didn't want to put any real work into it. You point that at the people responsible for those individual things. Looking back at the franchise as a whole, it hurts it, but honestly, like, Armada leaves its own legacy without having to focus on translation errors and how many characters were named Leader 1. You know, you can look past all of that. It's funny to go back and mock, but overall, Armada just did something that we haven't seen in a long time with the Transformers fandom, which is we kind of agreed on it. We kind of agreed on everything. Like, compared to what it was at the time, it was really, really good. It answered a lot of what we were wanting. And then it gave us more that we didn't realize would be so much fun. And I think the fact that mini cons are still kind of a thing that come up in Transformers fiction from once in a while, I think speaks volumes about how much of an impression they left and how fans are still kind of clamoring for those to come back the way that they used to be. Even the fact like Thrilling 30 gave us a whole new Minicon Combiner team, like out of nowhere. That's the kind of legacy that I think any Transformers series should leave. I think there should be some lasting impression of like, these characters I want to see come back. I want to see these come back. I always say the success of a Transformers line is pretty much dictated by what makes it beyond its original fiction. So when we see Hot Shot popping up from time to time, I think that's a big deal. I think when we see, people still clamoring for like a new Demolishor toy or a new Tidal Wave, a Commander, when fans are saying they want a Commander or Titan class Tidal Wave figure, that says a lot. I feel like that just ripples. And of course, mini-cons. So those are some general thoughts about Transformers Armada. I know it's easy to pick on looking back on it, but back then, it really was special. It really was an influential series. And even today, we can feel the ripples of it. And I think on its anniversary, when it's so easy to pick on Hot Shot or pick on the translation errors, I think it's important to look back and see where we were as a fandom and where Transformers was as a brand back then. This was Hasbro and Takara realizing there was a problem with what the Transformers were, and instead of shelving it for good like the Plan A was, they opted for Plan B, try and do something completely new. And I think it paid off, got them all the way until we got a movie. And it's been like a chaotic ride since then. But that is my thoughts for Transformers Armada, looking back 20 years after the fact. So let me know in the comments below. Were you around when Transformers Armada... don't date yourselves too much. But did you remember, were you there when the excitement first hit? Were you there when we first found them on the store shelves? Let me know your Armada thoughts in the comments below. And I will see you next time. Guys, I am facing the most powerful enemy any YouTuber can face, the algorithm, and I need your help to defeat him. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. Every time you do, we attack that algorithm and we drive it back until it can no longer defeat this channel. Thank you very much.